Hi, it's Mike Bogden for Base Camp with Mike and Sherry, and today I want to talk a little bit about some of the techniques I use when I'm sliding snow off roofs. I've had several people get a hold of me and ask me some questions, and also try to make suggestions on how they think things would work better. But as you can see from the snow behind me, we get a lot of snow, and so I'm dealing with snow on roofs that is usually at least 5 to 6 feet deep. So some of the questions that have been asked me are regarding the kind of wire that I use, and also some of the techniques. First of all, let's talk about wire. As I mentioned in an earlier video, I use tie wire, which is a thin gauge wire. You can buy it in spools in the store for $6 to $8. The reason for the narrow gauge wire is so that when you pull the wire through the snow, it'll go quickly and cut. This is like trying to cut cheese. You don't want to use a heavy gauge instrument to cut cheese. You want to use something thin so it'll slice through the cheese. Well, same thing with this. You want to go fast, you want to go quick, and you want to go so with something light gauge. So you want to use tie wire. It's cheap, it's easy, and the heavier you go, you can't use string, it won't pull through. You can't use cable, it's too heavy, you won't get it through fast enough, it takes too much effort. It's a lot faster and a lot easier to use tie wire. So tie wire is what I use, and that's my suggestion. The next question I've had is people have said, well, can I just set the wire on top of the roof before the snow starts, and it'll be already up there and ready to go? The problem with that is twofold. Number one, you got to cut the roof peak to get it to slide. The two parts of the roof, when they come together and there's snow on top of it, create a bond. You've got to break the bond to get the snow to go down either side. So if you're simply trying to cut the snow from underneath without cutting that roof peak, the snow's not going anywhere because it's not going to break loose on its own. You've got to cut that. So that's the first thing. So burying the wire is not going to make it easier. Burying multiple wires is even a worse idea because, if first of all, with all the snow we get, I only cut my roof once, and it's enough to protect it. So I don't know why you need multiple wires up there. And if you get one that's so bad you got to go up and do it twice, then you just got to get back up and cut it a second time, because you're going to have another 4 feet of snow or 5 feet of snow on the thing. So, burying the wire does not help. The other thing is if it's a house, you're going to end up with some ice buildup on your roof between the house and the snow. And if you have ice buildup, it's going to freeze your wire in place, and you're never going to get that wire to move anyway. So that doesn't make any sense. And thirdly, you don't always cut at the very bottom of the roof. A lot of times you've got to cut higher to get it to slide. I'll give you an example. Let's say your pitch isn't like this, it's more like this. If you cut it straight along the roof, you're not going to get enough momentum to get that snow to slide. But if you come up and set your upper wire up higher after you cut your peak, then pull down, it'll give you a greater grade and allow that snow to slide. So you can't judge that until after you get your roof peak cut. And so my suggestion is just do the work, get up on top, cut your roof peak, and then set your wire accordingly, and then pull it. And if it doesn't work the first time and you've cut your roof peak, all you got to do is go set your wire back up and do it a second time. There's a lot of times we have to do it twice because we don't get it to cut fast enough, or we have to change the angle of the cut to make it work. But it beats the heck out of shoveling it. So you can do it a second time if it doesn't work the first time, but you got to cut your roof peak. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is actual roof safety when you're on the roof cutting the peak. I've had times where I've just barely got the peak cut, started walking back, and stepped on one side or the other, and just the pressure of my foot has been enough that it's actually slid the roof on, not both sides necessarily, but one side. And I've had people underneath me that when I walk back that have had to dive out of the way because the roof's coming down. So once you get the roof peak cut, do not let somebody be underneath the eaves or underneath where the roof may slide, because just the motion of walking back across the roof to get out, back to your ladder is going to cause you a problem. Second thing, don't cut the roof all the way down to the roofing. Leave yourself about a foot, 6 inches to a foot of snow to walk on when you're walking back and forth. Because as you know, metal wet roofs are dangerous to walk on. If it's a house, the roof's going to have some heat to it, so it's going to get wet and really slippery, and it's also going to allow that roof to slide on its own if you're not careful. So what I do is I always leave 6 inches to a foot of snow on the peak, and then cut it beyond that. That way I've got something to walk on, and a lot of times I'll actually stand on the far side of the roof while we're cutting the first side, and then I'll set the wire again, after the first side slid, and then I'll kind of climb down and before we slide the second side. The next piece of advice I have is make sure that when you're placing your wire, what I usually do is I'll take the wire, the loose end, and drop it down on the far side of the cabin along the, and hand it off to my person on the ground. And then he'll take it around one side of the roof, go underneath the eaves, and then I'll walk across the roof, unwinding the skein and dropping it off on the other side. Now, when he ties that off, he actually ties it off so the part that the loose end is tied off onto a tree or maybe onto the building, and then he goes either over or under with the other wire and make sure that he has a complete cross cut, because you're going to have to make sure that you completely cut that off, which means your wires have to cross. So you want to make sure that you design your cut in such a way that you actually get that full cross, because just a corner not cut is enough to hold your whole roof up. So you've got to make sure you get it completely cut. And I've had roofs that we've pulled it almost all the way through, and it's that last foot that keeps it from, and once we get that, then the whole thing goes. So just be aware, you need to make sure that you cross your wires down in one of the lower corners, but when you do, cross them in such a way that you're not standing underneath the roof when you're sliding it, so you don't get hit. So that's something else that's important. And the last tip for today is make sure there's no tree limbs laying on your roof before you slide it. Take a little handsaw with you. I use one I use for tree stands, and I just keep that in the truck with me, and then you cut off whatever limbs you have to, because you can't slide a roof if there's limbs laying, pine boughs or whatever, laying on the roof mixed in with the snow. What'll happen is that the snow will actually hang up in the limb and it won't slide. So you've got to clear your roof of any limbs that are laying on it, intermingle with the snow before you can get the roof to slide. So be aware of that as well. And the other thing that will happen is that you'll get your line tangled up in the limb, and you won't be able to pull it all the way through anyway. So, make sure your limbs are clean. And then one last thing while we're talking about things to be aware of. Most people have vents on their cabins. Hopefully you know where the vents are. Usually they're fairly high up in the cabin, on the roof. But what I do is, just rather than try to cut around them and cut the roof in sections, because they're usually not that tall, usually only stick up about a foot or so. All I do is I just set my wire a little higher on the top end, and then cut it at a slightly steeper angle, and then I'll miss the vents and I don't have to worry about it. And if there's an extra foot of snow just on the peak of the roof, it's not a big deal. You've already eliminated all the weight and you're fine, because you can't walk on a bare roof. You're dealing with ice and snow and roofing material, and it's just like a big slip and slide. So, leave snow on the roof. It may not look as pretty as if it's completely clean, but the weight's all gone when you get it down to a foot anyway. The house is safe, which is the only point. So leave yourself plenty of snow to stand on while you're moving snow, and don't worry about it if you don't get the last foot of snow off the roof, because the building is fine. So those are a few tips to keep in mind when you're removing snow. And from Island Park and the Yellowstone area, this is Mike. Have a good day and be safe. Bye.